Some people talk too much and live too little. Ever thought about that? We live in an age where everyone wants to be heard, but almost no one has learned how to truly listen. Here's a hard truth you need to hear. The more you talk to prove yourself, the less power you actually have. And what if I told you that silence is the key to your deepest transformation? Carl Jung warned us, the ego shouts, but the soul whispers. So, who have you really been listening to? You might be losing opportunities, respect, and energy, just because you haven't yet mastered what comes out of your mouth. This isn't another motivational talk. It's a wake-up call. In this video, you'll understand why silence is the strategy of the wise, the leaders, the ones who actually win. And if you stay with me until the end, you'll learn exactly how to apply this, even if your life feels like chaos right now. So do this now. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and drop a comment below telling me which area of your life needs strategic silence the most, because today, you'll stop talking and finally start winning. The ego's chatter, the noise that hides the inner truth. Have you ever noticed how some people talk a lot but feel completely empty inside? Carl Jung explained that the ego craves attention. It wants to be seen, praised, validated. That's why it talks so much. But the more noise it makes, the harder it becomes to hear the soul's voice, that deep, quiet part of you that knows what truly matters. The ego screams, the self whispers. It's like being on stage, performing a role that constantly needs applause. But in that performance, the actor forgets who they really are. The ego's chatter is a way to mask insecurity. Those who have achieved self-mastery, who understand the teachings of deep psychology, don't need to convince anyone of anything. They simply are, and that's enough. Most people use speech as a shield. They fear silence because they know that if they go quiet, they'll have to face uncomfortable truths. But without silence, there is no self-control. True power is built in silence, not the kind that dominates others, but the kind that rises from within, quiet and unshakable. Those who lead their own minds don't need to prove anything. How often have you caught yourself over-explaining or justifying everything, trying to show you're right? That's the ego seeking approval. The strategy isn't to argue more. It's to pause and ask, why am I trying so hard to convince someone? That one question alone can unlock inner doors you didn't even know were there. Wisdom begins with sincere doubt. Here's a simple exercise. Try going an entire day saying less. Listen more. Let others speak. Notice how your ego reacts. Does it get uncomfortable? Good. That's exactly where your development begins. Jung would say that discomfort is the invitation to go beyond the persona, the mask you've built to survive the world. Think about silent leaders. People like Nelson Mandela, or even fictional characters like Don Corleone. They didn't need to shout to be heard. They knew the weight of silence. Their presence spoke louder than their words. That's emotional intelligence at its highest form. And yes, you can cultivate that too, but only once you quiet your inner noise. One critical insight: the louder the ego, the more vulnerable it is to external manipulation. Those who shout reveal where they hurt, but those who observe, in silence, learn where to strike. Underestimation begins the moment others see your emotional instability. Self-mastery requires restraint, pause, and the ability to listen to your soul. By now, if this message is striking something deep in you, drop a comment below. I want to know what part hit hardest. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and watch until the end. Because what's coming next might completely change the way you understand silence. And speaking of silence, let's explore how it becomes a portal to the self. Silence as a portal to the self. Silence makes people uncomfortable, and that's exactly why it's so powerful. Carl Jung saw silence not as emptiness, but as presence. A dense, meaningful presence that reveals what words can't express. When the world finally quiets down, that's when the soul begins to speak. And when you listen to your soul, you connect with something no one else can give you, your true self. In a world where everyone has an opinion, those who know how to be quiet stand out. They're like a candle glowing in a dark room, drawing attention without noise. That's the power of conscious silence. It's not about isolating yourself from the world. It's about reconnecting with the deepest part of you. In that sense, silence is pure strategy. It's wisdom in motion. It's self-mastery, refined. Have you ever tried staying silent even when you had something to say? It's not easy. It feels like a knot in your throat. But that knot is where growth begins. Instead of reacting impulsively, you observe. Instead of speaking, you feel. That's self-control in practice. And when you start to act like that, your entire presence shifts. People notice, and they respect you more. Think of Tibetan monks. They spend years in silence, not because they have nothing to say, but because they're listening to something deeper. Want a practical version of that for your life? Take a silent afternoon for yourself. No phone, no music, no conversation. Just you and your thoughts. Simple? Yes. Powerful. More than you can imagine. That's real power. Jung believed the self doesn't rise from the noise of consciousness, but from the silence of the unconscious. It's there, in that stillness, where mystery lives. Silence isn't an escape. It's a portal. It takes you inward, beyond the persona, beyond the ego. And the deeper you go into that space, the more you separate yourself from the crowd living on autopilot. Some confuse silence with weakness. They have no idea that holding your tongue at the right moment is a sign of emotional intelligence and leadership, because you can't lead others until you've learned to lead yourself. And leading yourself means knowing when to speak and when not to. That's real-life philosophy. Silence is also a strategic tool. It creates curiosity. It draws people in. It gives others the space to reveal themselves. Instead of trying to control conversations, you simply observe. And observers learn more. That applies to your job, your relationships, your family. In every area of life, well-placed silence is a weapon of influence and inner development. And as you practice this, deeper silence, it starts to give back. It returns clarity, peace, intuition. You stop living in reactive mode, and in that moment you realize something powerful. What you say is often not who you are. Which takes us to the next point, how words became masks that sabotage your true power. Words as masks. How the persona sabotages your power. From an early age, we're taught to please, to fit in, to be well-behaved. And that's where the persona is born. The social mask we wear to match expectations. Jung said the persona is necessary, but living only through it means living halfway. And in this role, talking too much becomes a shield. People speak not to express, but to protect. Ever noticed how someone's tone or personality shifts depending on who's around? That's not authenticity. That's the persona in action. Of course, adapting to social situations is healthy. Nobody wants to be an outcast. But if everything you say is tailored to please, you're betraying your true self. And that slowly erodes your real power. Here's the irony. The more you try to please everyone, the less respect you get. People can sense, even unconsciously, when someone's being fake. And that creates distance, distrust, and even underestimation. It's the opposite of authentic leadership, which comes from those who speak with truth, not from a strategy of approval. Want a practical example? Watch your daily conversations. How often do you say something just to avoid conflict or protect an image? That's your persona doing the talking. Now try this filter. Is this really how I feel? Or am I just trying to impress someone? That question alone shifts your communication and strengthens your self-mastery. Your words stop being a performance and start becoming an extension of yourself. And that's where the magic happens. You begin to attract people and opportunities, aligned with your essence, not your disguise. And that changes everything. When you speak with authenticity, you build real connection. And real connection fuels true development. But here's the catch. The persona is comfortable. It protects you. It helps you survive. But it also traps you. That's why silence is so powerful. Because when the noise stops, the persona weakens, and your true self begins to rise. It takes courage, yes, but it gives back something far more valuable: power that no one can take away. Deep psychology shows that people often use words to avoid the silence that would reveal their wounds. The ones who talk nonstop, they're usually running from something. And when you begin to notice that in yourself, you gain control over those internal defenses. By integrating the shadow, you free yourself from the need to appear perfect. So here's a mentor's advice: stop trying to prove who you are. Be it. Let your silence do the work. Let your actions speak. Words matter, but only after you've learned how to not speak. And that takes us to an even deeper truth, where what remains unsaid carries far more power than anything you could ever say. The mystery of the unconscious. What's left unsaid creates fascination. There's something magnetic about people who don't reveal everything. Jung taught that the unconscious doesn't speak, it suggests. It moves through symbols, dreams, silences, and sensations. And here's the truth: what's left unsaid is often what captures the most attention. Fascination grows in the gaps, in what can't be explained with words. Notice how the most intriguing people aren't the loudest. They reveal little, and that's exactly why they become so captivating. That's a form of power, not through manipulation, but through presence, through holding back. Because often, what you don't say holds more value than what you do. Mastery over the unconscious gives you weight without needing to shout. Deep psychology shows us that the unconscious is like an ocean, still on the surface, chaotic and full of life underneath. People who talk too much only show the tip of the iceberg, but those who know how to remain silent reveal depth, not with words, but with energy, posture, and observation. You can't learn that in a communication course. That's self-mastery in action. Want to try this? Next time you're in a conversation, say less and observe more. Let people reveal themselves. Watch their expressions, their silences, their contradictions. That's how you build real influence, because people remember how you made them feel, not how much you talked. Jung studied dreams not to interpret them like formulas, but to understand what the unconscious was whispering through symbols. He knew that image and silence carried more truth than explanation. That's wisdom beyond intellect. Silence, when conscious, is never empty. It's full of meaning, full of power. As you practice conscious silence, you'll begin to hear what others try to hide with words. You'll pick up on their unspoken fears, insecurities, and motives, and that gives you emotional advantage. That's strategy, because those who see without being seen are the ones who hold the upper hand. Some people try to impress with big words or quotes, but those who've walked through Jung's teachings understand real impact isn't in what you say, but in what you leave unsaid. The unconscious respects silence. So does the soul. Words can be empty. Silence, when mastered, never is. And the most powerful shift? Once you embrace that silence, your actions start to speak for you. Actions that don't need explanation. Actions that move people. And that's where transformation begins. Not with promises, but with silent, aligned behavior that changes everything. Silent action. How self-mastery transforms destiny. Jung once said, "We are not what we say, but what we do with what we feel." That changes everything. Some people talk beautifully, promise big things, make plans, but never take action. Others remain silent and build empires. True self-mastery doesn't make noise, it acts. While the world gets distracted by those shouting, the real transformation happens quietly. Here, silence isn't lack of movement. It's pure presence. Focused action. It's deciding to change without announcing it to anyone. Real transformation begins in the invisible, in those quiet choices like going to bed earlier, training without motivation, cutting off toxic relationships without posting about it. That's power that doesn't need applause. Ever seen someone reappear after years, totally different? They vanished, but while no one was watching, they were molding themselves, getting disciplined, stronger. That's what Jung called the individuation process in motion. No spotlight, no cheering crowd, But when they return, everything shifts. Because they are different. Want a practical way to apply this? Choose one area of your life and make a quiet change. Diet, friends, how you use your phone, anything. But do it silently. Let your results speak for themselves. And they will. Because once self-mastery becomes your habit, development becomes your destiny. The gap between what you say and what you do is where real wisdom lives. The wise don't talk about what they know. They apply it. And application is what changes everything. In your work, your health, your relationships, and especially in your inner world. Because only those who change inside can truly shift what's outside. Many people waste energy trying to convince others that they're changing, but what actually convinces is silent consistency. It's not about justifying, it's about committing. And when you truly commit to your evolution, life starts to respond. Doors open, people shift, reality adjusts. Silent action is the master key no one sees coming. Jung shows us that the deepest movements don't make noise. They happen in the dark, inside the soul. And when that soul aligns with inner truth, destiny changes direction. Not by luck, but by coherence. The external follows the internal, and those who master that process become architects of their own lives. And once you realize that your actions speak louder than your words, a new door opens, one that reveals what your silence has been trying to say all along. Because the shadow speaks too, and what it reveals next will reshape everything you thought you knew about yourself. The language of the shadow, what silence reveals. The shadow doesn't speak out loud, it whispers through your silences. Carl Jung teaches that the shadow is everything you reject in yourself. And here's the paradox. It shows up exactly when you're trying to appear perfect. In slips of the tongue, awkward silences, nervous gestures. It doesn't need words. It simply shows itself. Ever had a sudden outburst over something minor? Or felt deeply offended by a light comment? That's your shadow showing its face. And if you have the courage to listen to that discomfort, that's where real development begins. Because the shadow isn't a monster, it's a messenger. And silence is the only channel it uses to speak. It's in silence that you begin to notice hidden patterns. Thoughts you'd never say out loud, but that quietly steer your behavior. When you learn to observe those thoughts without judgment, you start to understand the roots of your fears, envy, anger, and insecurity. That's deep psychology in practice, and it's where self-mastery truly takes root. Want a practical tool? Think of a moment that recently triggered you. Instead of justifying your reaction, sit in silence and write down everything that came to mind. No filter. Then read it aloud. You'll sound like someone else. That someone is your shadow. And hearing that voice is a giant leap toward emotional self-ownership. What most people don't realize is that the shadow holds enormous power. What you repress is often the very thing that could make you stronger. What you avoid facing is the block between you and your full potential. Jung said there's no light without owning the dark, and that integration begins not with words, but with listening. A lot of people try to silence the shadow with fake positivity. They pretend they're never angry, jealous, or afraid. But suppressing the shadow only makes it grow stronger, in secret. Conscious silence, on the other hand, shines light into those corners. Not to expose, but to understand. And understanding is the first step toward transformation. The breakthrough comes when you realize what you've been avoiding might be the exact thing that will make you powerful. But for that to happen, you need to stop running from yourself. And silence, the kind most people are terrified of, is the clearest mirror. It shows you everything, especially what you're not ready to see. Yet once you see it, there's no turning back. And when you begin to face your shadow with honesty, something shifts. Your voice changes. Your posture changes. Your presence deepens. And then you discover that you no longer need to convince anyone of anything. Because those who have integrated their shadow don't argue. They just are. And that's exactly what we'll step into next. Don't try to convince. Integration is a journey, not a debate. One of the ego's biggest traps is the need to convince, to prove you're right, evolved in control. Jung taught that if you constantly feel the urge to prove something, it's probably because you're not fully convinced of it yourself. And here's the core of self-mastery. Truth doesn't need defense. It stands on its own. Have you noticed how truly wise people are usually the quietest in discussions? They don't engage in pointless debates because they've already integrated what they need to. When someone lives their truth, it shows in behavior, not in speeches. And the more someone shouts, "I've changed," the more likely they haven't. Real change is lived, not announced. Here's a powerful strategy. Replace "I need them to understand me" with "I need to understand myself." Every time you feel that urge to explain your choices, ask, "Am I really at peace with them?" Those with self-control don't need others' approval to move forward. They know the path is theirs, and that's enough. Let's make it real. Say you've decided to cut off draining relationships. Some people won't get it, some will judge you, some will push back. That's normal. But if you feel the need to explain your decision to everyone, maybe you're still unsure inside. Now, if you act with quiet consistency, time will reveal everything. No speech is needed. Jung said integration is a process, a deep inner dive. It's not something you shout about. It's something you live. And those who are truly on this path don't have time to argue with people still addicted to appearances. They're busy growing, transforming, aligning. Wisdom is knowing that not everyone will get you, and that's okay. Not everyone is supposed to. You're not here to convince, you're here to evolve. And those on that path know some truths can't be explained, only experienced. That might bother others, but it awakens those who are ready. The moment you stop trying to convince, you free up an incredible amount of energy. Energy you can redirect into action, into reading, building, meditating, training, creating, into anything that makes your life better. And that's when you start influencing others, not with words, but with presence. And that presence, solid, calm, coherent, connects you to something much bigger than the ego, the collective unconscious. A force that speaks through silence, but moves everything. And that's where we're headed next. Learning to listen to what can't be heard with the ears. Deep listening. The collective unconscious speaks through silence. Not everything you feel belongs only to you. Jung called it the collective unconscious, a field of symbols, memories, and archetypes that passes through generations. And guess what language it speaks? Silence. Not the kind of silence that's empty, but the kind that's fully present. A silence that listens beyond words, with humility and depth. When you truly go quiet, you begin to hear things that don't come from your rational mind. Intuitions, sensations, signals that seem to appear from nowhere. But it's not nowhere. It's everything you can't see. This is a kind of power that no degree can give you. It's self-mastery in its most spiritual form, and it's deeply transformational. Ever walked into a room and instantly felt the energy was heavy, without anyone saying a word? That's unconscious perception. And the more you sharpen your deep listening, the more you start to notice what lies behind people's words, their silence, their eyes. This isn't mysticism, it's refined emotional intelligence. It's being one step ahead, in silence. Try this. In your next meeting or conversation, speak less than usual. Observe more. Listen not just to what's said, but how it's said. Pay attention to the pauses, the tone, the shifts in body language. You'll notice far more than if you were just waiting to speak. This is gold, especially if you aim to lead with wisdom. The collective unconscious also speaks through symbols, dreams, and life patterns. Start paying attention to the recurring themes in your life. Abandonment, control, success, fear. These aren't random, they're messages. And once you silence the inner noise, you'll begin to receive these messages clearly. Jung's philosophy teaches us that everything communicates, even silence. Listening to the invisible is a practice, and like all practices, it requires discipline, meditation, solitude, nature, deep music. These aren't luxuries, they're tools. Tools that tune your system to hear what others miss. And when you hear better, you live better. Because you stop reacting and start responding, consciously. A lot of people think power comes from being louder. But true power comes from hearing what no one else notices. Those who perceive first, act better. Those who act better, lead naturally. This is a silent strategy, but it's devastatingly effective. And it begins with one decision: to listen deeply. And as this type of listening becomes second nature, something shifts. You start pulling away from chaos, from noise, from ego battles. And in that sacred withdrawal, you find something rare: peace. But to truly heal, sometimes you need to disappear for a while, and that's exactly what we're going into next. The absence that heals, the power of withdrawing to rebuild yourself. Disappearing isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's healing. Carl Jung called it a psychic retreat, a necessary withdrawal so lost parts of the self can be reclaimed. And in that intentional absence, something sacred begins to unfold. The ego quiets, and the soul finally breathes. That's the beginning of inner reconstruction. You know those moments when everything feels too loud, too many people, too many opinions, too many demands? That's the signal, not to escape, but to return. The power of withdrawing lies in breaking the burnout cycle before it breaks you, and this doesn't require a monastery. Sometimes all it takes is one afternoon, one no, one boundary. Society teaches us that disappearing is wrong, that we always need to be visible, active, engaged. But real development demands the opposite: periods of intentional invisibility. In the silence of absence, identity is reforged. And when you return, you're no longer the same. You return clearer, stronger, more conscious. Want something practical? Take time off. For real. Put your phone away. Walk with no destination. Journal whatever comes up. It sounds simple, but it's deeply therapeutic. That's deep psychology in everyday form. And if you don't choose to do it now, life might force you later when it hurts more. Self-mastery includes knowing when to leave the stage, not because you're weak, but because you're wise. Those who retreat to heal return better equipped to handle the storms. Jung made it clear. True, healing doesn't happen under a spotlight. It happens in quiet and solitude, where the self can gather its scattered pieces. This absence also reveals who truly respects your space. When you go quiet, those who value your soul will stay. Those who were draining you will fade. And that's healing in itself. Emotional filtering, boundary setting. And boundaries, when clear, are the foundation of real respect, including the respect you owe yourself. Strong people aren't those who endure everything silently until they break. They're the ones who know when to pause, step back, and reset. And when done consciously, this retreat isn't a breakdown, it's a strategy. The person who comes back from a psychic retreat isn't empty. They're full of purpose, and that purpose can move mountains. And when you return, your words regain weight, your gaze holds presence, your touch means something again. Because in the silence of absence, something new was born inside you. And now, it's time for that rebirth to find its voice. Not just any voice, but a sacred one. A word that heals, a word that transforms. The word that heals, sacred speech, only comes after silence. Once you've truly learned to be silent, something shifts inside you. Words stop being automatic. They become acts of power. Jung called this the voice of the self, speech that no longer comes from the ego, but from the integrated soul. That's why, after true silence, every word you speak carries weight, intention, and a presence that heals. Ever heard someone who barely speaks but somehow says everything? Those people don't waste words. They deliver truths. And what's remarkable is that their words heal. A sentence spoken at the right moment can be more therapeutic than hours of empty advice. Because it doesn't come from the mind, it comes from deep listening. From felt experience, Jung knew that transformation happens when a word rises from the unconscious as a symbol, When that happens, you don't speak to convince. You speak to liberate. Your words become medicine, keys, portals, and they only reveal themselves to those who have walked through the desert of silence and had the courage to face their shadow. Want a real-life example? Think of Viktor Frankl, author of Man's Search for Meaning. He survived the horror of a Nazi concentration camp. And when he came out, he didn't shout. He wrote. His words echoed through generations because they came from integrated pain. From a silence lived, from shadow transformed. That's the kind of word that heals. Here's a practice for you. Stop talking about yourself for a while. Just observe. Sit with your thoughts. When you feel something ripening inside, write it, record it, speak it to yourself. Feel it. That kind of speech becomes sacred. It's no longer noise, it's truth. And truth is rare, especially in a world addicted to distraction. People with self-mastery don't talk to fill the air. They talk to bring light, to build, to transform. And that only happens when words are aligned with inner truth. A truth you can only access by walking through silence and making peace with what lives there. Words are symbols, and symbols activate parts of the unconscious that logic never reaches. That's why a song, a poem, or a simple phrase can awaken something deep in you. Not because of how it's said, but because of where it comes from. When it comes from the self, it resonates. When it comes from ego, it just entertains. And when you finally understand that speech is not a weapon, but a gift, everything changes. Because that gift, when used with care, allows you to lead with presence, influence with truth, and, more importantly, heal with your voice. And now that you know this, it's time to ask, why are so many people still running from themselves? Now tell me, after everything we've explored, are you really going to keep wasting your power on empty words? You've just been through a deep journey, through the ego, into silence, into the shadow, into sacred speech. You've seen that real power doesn't announce itself. It simply is. So here's the question. What are you going to do with this knowledge? Will you keep explaining yourself, trying to please everyone? Or will you go quiet, take action, and win? Most people won't apply this, because it's easier to stay on autopilot than to practice self-mastery daily. But if you made it here, something in you is ready to change. So tell me, which area of your life needs strategic silence right now? Comment below. I really want to hear from you. And of course, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stick with us, because this is just the beginning. And don't forget to watch the follow-up video. After this video, you'll stop running from yourself. Carl Jung. That video completes this one and will take your transformation to the next level. After all, silence was just the beginning. The real game starts now.